Maxine Brooks had always imagined meeting an alien would be, well, less adorable. She had studied Zinther anatomy for years, knew every detail of their physiology from their triple ocular sight to the impressive bioluminescence that illuminated their skin during their nights, which was less romantic than really hard to sleep through. She had imagined standing before a towering figure, covered in odd scales, or perhaps a massive, fearsome creature, 10 feet tall with an elongated face and strange, glowing tentacles. But what she got instead, what stepped into the containment room with an almost theatrical flourish, was a tiny guy in a suit. Wow, Maxine said, blinking, mouth slightly agape. You're not what I expected. Zorith, the alien ambassador of the Zinther race, paused. His 3 luminous eyes flicked over her, and he tilted his small head slightly, the way a dog might when you've said something absurd. Maxine had always imagined she'd be the one getting the weird looks when interacting with aliens, but here she was, gawking at him like he was the one who didn't belong. I assure you, Dr. Brooks, Zorith said with an almost dapper, yet completely disarming smile, I'm quite used to being the surprise. I know humans prefer to imagine all Zinther are giant, terrifying creatures. But, he gave a slight shrug of his perfectly tailored suit, I like to think we can be a little more charming. Maxine was completely taken aback. She was expecting a creature with the social graces of a wolverine. Instead, Zorith was dressed like he was about to attend a cocktail party. His tiny alien form was just under 4 feet, his head disproportionately large with his eyes gleaming like polished stones. His skin shimmered faintly, shifting through the softest of purples and blues, though it was hard to tell in the sterile light of the containment room. He looked nothing like the horror stories about extraterrestrial life that the media perpetuated. I didn't mean to stare, Maxine stammered, adjusting her glasses nervously, but I expected you to be bigger. And, less suit-wearing. She bit her lip. I'm just a little surprised. Zorith chuckled. It's quite all right. I get it. I've had humans assume I'd be some sort of horrible, tentacled monstrosity. But you see, Dr. Brooks, not all creatures are as aggressive as your people. His smile was teasing, but his tone was playful, with no real sting. In fact, you might find me more sophisticated than some humans I've encountered. She blinked. Did you just? I did, he confirmed, giving a small bow. Please don't take it personally. Maxine stared at him, still trying to process this adorable, intelligent creature who was also clearly messing with her. Okay. Fine. You're cool. But I have to ask, do you actually wear that suit all the time? Zorith raised an eyebrow. Why, yes. What is it with humans and clothing? Do your species enjoy it because you find it amusing? Well, no, Maxine said, stifling a laugh. I mean, we wear it for functional reasons, but I guess it's weird when an alien wears it for fashion. She gestured helplessly. How did you even know about suits? Zorith made a dismissive gesture. I have access to your planet's media. And I have seen you all wear strange, uncomfortable things. But this? This is elegance. Maxine couldn't help it, she laughed, fully relaxed now. All right, fine. You're smarter than me, and you're better dressed. I'll give you that. But now what? Zorith studied her, clearly intrigued. Now we talk. I believe that's what humans do, yes. Talk? Maxine let out a little snort. Yes, that's what we do. We talk. And talk they did. The next few days blurred together in a frenzy of scientific observations, public appearances, and cultural exchanges, as the Earth government called them. Maxine had to play the role of human translator, but she soon realized she and Zorith weren't merely translating languages, they were translating culture. Maxine's job was to understand alien species and their intricacies. Zorith, on the other hand, was sent as an envoy to ensure peaceful negotiations between his people and humanity. But despite his diplomatic stature, the little alien wasn't all business. His teasing, often sarcastic remarks, mostly directed at the absurdities of human customs, had a way of disarming her. Their interactions were peppered with moments of humor, and Maxine began to feel something more than just professional respect for him. It was an unusual kind of connection. Something she'd never expected to feel, especially not with someone so alien. But Zorith wasn't just funny. He was insightful. He'd seen human behavior from an entirely different perspective, and he challenged Maxine in ways that felt oddly refreshing. Like when he questioned the human obsession with romance. "You see," he said one evening, the two of them sitting across from each other at a small table in a high-tech cafe, "I've studied your species. And I'm curious. Why do you speak of love as though it is something to be earned?" Maxine raised an eyebrow. "You want to talk about love? With me? An earthling? Why not?" Zoritha's 3 eyes glinted mischievously. "We Zinther do not understand love as you do. But we understand the desire to connect. And I've been wondering, why is it so difficult for your species to simply accept that connection?" Maxine shrugged, though she could feel a sudden tension in the air. "I don't know. We humans complicate things. We overthink. We build up walls and..." She stopped herself. She wasn't used to being so open. "I guess it's easier to feel lonely than to risk being hurt." He looked at her, studying her carefully, his expression unreadable. "I think," he said, his voice softer now, "you're afraid of being vulnerable." The words hung between them. Maxine shifted uncomfortably, but she didn't look away. "I don't think I'm afraid of being vulnerable," she replied, her voice quieter now. "I think I'm afraid of being alone." For the first time, she saw something like understanding pass across his face. Something human. "I see," Zorith said. "But you do not have to be alone. Not if you can trust. Not if you let yourself connect." Over the next few weeks, Maxine and Zoritha's dynamic shifted. At first, the interactions were professional, an exchange of knowledge, cultural observations, and the occasional witty remark. But something unspoken began to stir beneath the surface. Maxine found herself drawn to Zoritha's insights, his sharp observations about humanity, and his ability to look at her world through an entirely different lens. They were studying human-alien relations from different angles, but their conversations often veered into more personal territory. Zoritha's understanding of human emotions, although not entirely instinctive, was growing, and Maxine realized he wasn't just talking to her out of diplomatic duty. He was genuinely interested, and so was she. It started small, a look that lingered a little longer than necessary, a smile that felt a little too warm, a joke that was shared in a way that felt intimate. But the real turning point came one evening, after a grueling series of political meetings with various ambassadors. They were both exhausted, Maxine from translating and juggling personalities, Zorith from maintaining the cold veneer of diplomacy with his own people. Maxine stood on the balcony of their shared quarters, staring out at the vast expanse of Earth's horizon. The city lights below twinkled like a spread of stars. She was on edge, her thoughts swirling like the wind that ruffled her hair. Zorith stepped up beside her, his footsteps so quiet she didn't hear him approach. She didn't flinch when he appeared. She had grown used to his silent ways. He could be both present and invisible in the room at the same time. His presence, in a strange way, was always soothing. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the hum of the ventilation system and the distant murmur of the city. Finally, it was Zorith who broke the silence, his voice gentle yet probing. "I don't understand you, Maxine." Maxine turned to look at him, her brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" "I don't understand why you carry such heavy burdens," he said, his eyes softening. "You seem afraid of what's inside you. I've noticed it, more than once. You speak of vulnerability as if it's something you must avoid." Maxine's heart skipped a beat, though she managed to mask her surprise. She had never been one to open up easily, especially not to something, like him. "I'm not afraid of being vulnerable," she said, her voice steady, though there was an edge of defensiveness. "I just don't want to make the same mistakes twice." Zorith regarded her with an intensity that made her feel as though he could see straight through her. "I do not believe you are afraid of mistakes, Maxine. I believe you are afraid of letting someone see you as you truly are." Maxine swallowed. His words hit too close to home. She hadn't expected him to be so perceptive, especially not after only a few weeks. She glanced down at her hands, fidgeting with the sleeve of her jacket, then back at him. "I don't know what you want from me, Zorith. You keep pushing, asking questions. Why? What do you expect?" Zorith's eyes softened, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "I expect nothing. But I am starting to understand why you carry so much weight. And I think you could let go of it, if you wanted to." Maxine took a step back, trying to put some distance between them, between the emotions welling up inside her and the rational voice that was telling her to hold herself together. "You're wrong," she said, almost too quickly. "It's not that simple. I can't just let go. There are things in this world." She stopped, unsure if she was referring to Earth or her own heart. "There are things I can't control. Things I can't change." Zorith said nothing for a long while, and Maxine thought he might leave it at that. But he didn't. "I am beginning to believe that control is one of the illusions your species holds on to most tightly," he said slowly, with surprising warmth. "But I wonder, what would happen if you stopped trying to control everything? What would happen if you trusted someone else to help you carry the burden?" She felt a lump in her throat, and her eyes stung as the weight of his words settled into her chest. For a long moment, all she could do was stare at him, as if he had said something impossible to grasp, and yet, something that felt so very true. "Zorith. I don't know how to do that," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've never let anyone close enough to help me with this stuff." Zorith reached out, gently touching her arm. His hand was cool, but his touch, unlike anything Maxine had ever experienced, felt like an invitation. She could feel the warmth of his energy through the slight contact, his presence wrapping around her like a blanket. "You don't have to be afraid of letting me in," he said softly. "I will never betray your trust." Maxine didn't know what it was about his words that made her heart race. Maybe it was the sincerity she saw in his 3 eyes, or maybe it was the gentle, unspoken promise he seemed to be offering her. Either way, she felt something inside her begin to crack open. Something fragile and old, something that had been buried for too long. She was afraid, yes, but at that moment, she realized she was more afraid of pushing him away than she was of the vulnerability he was asking her to embrace. "I'm scared, Zorith," she said, her voice breaking as she turned to face him fully. "Scared of trusting. Scared of letting go. I've seen too much betrayal to believe that someone like you wouldn't just—" "I am not your past," he interrupted, his voice firm but tender. "I will not make you regret trusting me. I can't promise that everything will be perfect, but I can promise you that I will always be here. Always." For the first time in a long time, Maxine allowed herself to believe him. Over the following days, Maxine's relationship with Zorith deepened. What had started as professional curiosity had slowly shifted into something much more complicated, something neither of them had expected. The political climate on Earth was tense, and the Zinther race was pushing for new trade agreements and diplomatic ties, but Maxine and Zorith could no longer pretend they were just colleagues. They weren't just scientists and ambassadors. They were something more, but what that something was, neither of them knew yet. What they did know, however, was that the world outside was changing. News of human-alien relations was beginning to stir in the media, and the public was watching. And, unfortunately, there were factions on both sides that didn't like what they were seeing. It wasn't long before things took a darker turn. The first sign was subtle. A few mentions in the news, rumors that human politicians were concerned about the closeness between Maxine and Zorith. A growing discomfort among some of the more conservative factions on Earth. And then, there was the first anonymous message sent to Maxine's encrypted account. A threat, but not one she could easily ignore. It was carefully worded, and its implications were even clearer. "If you continue with this relationship, you will risk everything: your career, your safety, and the future of human-alien relations. Stop now, or face the consequences." Maxine stared at the message, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She knew the implications of what it meant, not just for her, but for Zorith as well. They were both walking dangerous ground, in a time where every step could lead to catastrophe. The question loomed over them: would their love be worth the political and personal cost? Would it be worth the risk of everything they had worked for? Maxine turned to Zorith that night, the weight of the world settling on her shoulders. "They're going to find out, aren't they?" she asked quietly. Zorith's 3 eyes met hers, unblinking. "Perhaps. But we cannot control what others think, Maxine. All we can control is what we choose to do." Her heart pounded as she met his gaze. What if they don't accept us? What if it all falls apart? Zorith was quiet for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice was steady and unwavering. "Then we rebuild. Together." And in that moment, Maxine knew that whatever came next, she wasn't alone.